Welcome to NAIFA's Advisor Today podcast series, where we focus on how financial advisors work, live, and give to their local communities and our greater financial services industry. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's Advisor Today podcast. I'm your co-host, Suzanne Carowin. My co-host, Chris Gandy, is out today doing some preventative stuff, so we're going to miss him. But we have an awesome guest today named Lynne Franklin. Before we get to that, I just want to do a plug because this whole episode is brought to you by Apex. Apex is NAIFA's brand for our Professional Development Summit. And we're having a regional about 2 weeks, October 24th. Lynne Franklin is one of the keynotes. So we're actually bringing this to you ahead of time so you can kind of get an insight there. If you're not going to be with us at our new national headquarters in Washington, D.C., then you can also look for maybe future things where Lynne will be, but at least you can get some of the unbelievable goodness that Lynne's going to present to us today. So Lynne, thank you for being here. We're excited to have you on the show.
It's great to be here and looking forward to giving people things they can use right away to make their lives better.
So Lynne, if anybody did any Googling on Lynne, she kind of starts out with, you can help us become a mind reader. So first and foremost, Lynne, why don't you tell us what it is that you do and how you got here?
Basically what I do is I fast track leaders to be seen, heard, and promoted. And how I do that is by helping them do a better job of connecting with people. So it's connecting with clients, it's connecting with vendors, it's connecting with team members. It's all of those relationships, building those relationships that build your success. And how that ends up looking depends upon what people need. The three areas I play in the most are one-on-one communication coaching usually for leaders. Second is bring me in and help me work with your team so they do a better job of connecting. And three is the stuff that we get to do at Apex East, where we get together as a group of people and we solve a problem that's really bothering people that day. And once again, everybody walks off with at least one good thing they can do to improve their lives and improve their business.
Well, as you know, our members are all about communication. They practice we just had John Wheeler on last week. He was talking about, choosing your words, unpacking your words, making sure that you practice your language, but you also are practicing the body language part. And I think that's so important. So let's talk about that a little bit because all of our members and prospective members, by the way, if you're out there and you're not a member, you need to become a member. This is the type of good stuff you get in part of our community. So in terms of that, let's start with some of the basics of body language. And I think most people know because the typical scenario that our member has is that they need new clients, right? And it's time to prospect and it's all about meeting new people. So can you take us just right from there? Let's just get to the good stuff. Let's get to some practical things about how to, however you want to say it, make the best impression so you can open that conversation because our people need to have some pretty serious conversations as quickly as possible. Building trust and rapport is tantamount, right? Tantamount to their success. So I'm just going to throw that little softball over to you and you take it from there.
Okay, there are a couple of different things that we need to pay attention to, particularly when you're talking about making good first impressions. And the first one is, because I'm a neuroscience nerd, I study how the brain works and I study the boring research and then I try to figure out what it actually means in the real world. And so one bit of boring but practical information is that the best indicator about whether or not you will have a relationship with a new person, whether it's an interview or whether it's, for a, possible relationship, or even if it's you're hiring other people, and you're going to laugh, it's literally the handshake. So honest to goodness, practice your freaking handshake. So if you give people a good handshake that's firm, but not bone crushing, and certainly not limp-wristed, research shows that's the best indicator about whether or not people will feel comfortable enough with you to start trusting you. And obviously, when we're talking about handshake, a lot of the stuff we do is now virtual. And so some of that becomes, all right, if you're doing a meeting on Zoom, then what you do is you clear the clutter out of your background. You literally do what you can see on my screen here. I'm filling up 80% of the screen with a little bit up at the top of over my head. And one of the other things that you need to do and pay attention to more often, whether in person or whether on screen, is actually Really, we get so intense about the things that we want to accomplish that a lot of times we don't smile. And there's a pejorative term for this. It's called resting bitch face. And it's not just for women. It happens to men as well. And it's you're thinking, so you're going, yeah, and that to other people, they experience that as frowning. So pay attention to what you're doing with your resting face. Once again, in person, on screen. And I recommend practice the Mona Lisa smile, like you're truly interested. And if you're on screen, it also means you look at the camera rather than look at the other person. And I do this a lot when I'm doing on-screen meetings, and that is I let people know when you're speaking, I'm going to be looking at your image on the screen. So it'll look like I'm not paying attention to you, but I really am because I want to get the whole picture of you. And when I'm speaking, I'll be looking at the camera because I want you to know that I'm talking directly to you. So if you look at me while you're speaking, it's going to look like I'm not looking at you, but I really am. And when people know that's what you're doing with your eye contact, it makes people feel a lot more comfortable. Because you were talking before about the reading people's body language to read their mind stuff. This plays into that. Because what happens is that people's brains process information in 3 ways: visually, auditorily, or kinesthetically. And when you understand how their brains work, then you do a better job of connecting with them. So the 10,000 foot view, and if you want more on this, I actually have a TEDx talk out there on how to be a mind reader. 11 minutes, time well spent. It gets into more detail than we can get into here. But you pay attention to how people look, their body language, and then you can figure out how their brains work. So 75% of the people in the world are visual thinkers. They think in pictures and images. And you can tell that by they're usually well-dressed. They usually sit up straight. They usually give you lots of eye contact, and and they have thin lips. Who knows why? But they just most of the time they do. And so what ends up happening is that when you check out body language and you're seeing that sort of thing either in person or on the screen, then you know they're one of the 75% of people who are visual thinkers. And what you do then is basically 2 things. Number 1, you give them lots of eye contact because visual thinkers, I call them lookers. If you're not giving them eye contact, they believe you're not paying attention to them, and that haunts them off. The second thing you do with visual people is you use visual words. I see what you mean, or picture your future when you don't have this problem. So it's the kind of language that they're using in their brains. You're speaking to them in their language. So lookers, 75% of people in the world, they think in pictures and images. Second largest group, listeners. They process information auditorily. So they talk to themselves. And what ends up happening is that listeners, usually not as well dressed as lookers because appearance isn't as important to them. And most of the time, they don't give you lots of eye contact. What ends up happening is that listeners have a tendency to look down and to the left because that's where you look when you're remembering something you have heard. What happens, though, is when people are doing that, their ears are pointed at you. So listeners use their ears the way lookers use their eyes. And listeners also have a tendency to talk to themselves. So they could mumble or they could be moving their lips when they're thinking because that's how they process information. And if you want to connect with these people, you do 2 things. Number 1, you do not give them unremitting eye contact because it frightens them. It makes them feel uncomfortable, which means that when you're speaking with them, you look at them and then you look away. And when they're speaking with you, you look at them and then you look away.
Give them a break. Actually give them a break so they can kind of...
Right, because they generally, they don't want to be center stage. So too much eye contact just makes them feel uncomfortable. And not surprisingly, the second thing you do for them is that you use auditory words. It sounds good to me. I want to hear what you have to say about that because that's how their brains are working. So listeners, 20% of the people in the world. The final 5% of people are called touchers. So these are people who process information kinesthetically. And the reason they're called touchers is that whether or not these people have ever met you before in their lives, they're ready to come at you with a giant bear hug. And, so, that's the biggest tell. They also have a tendency to lean in or touch your shoulder or speak in deep voices, or have full lips. So these are things that, these are ways you can identify touchers. And the way you connect with these people is if you feel comfortable with them, then you can let them, touch you on your arm or your shoulders, or certainly shake hands with them. Because, once again, if they're coming at you and you don't feel comfortable having somebody hug you that you've never met before, what they're looking for is contact. So stick your hand out, give them a point of contact. That's what they're interested in. They're not trying to invade your space. They're trying to decrease the space between you and them, because that's how they build rapport. And the second thing you do is you use the same kind of language they use in their brains, which is feelings and tactile words. We want to get in touch with you, or how does that solution feel? Because once again, that's the language they're using in their own minds. So one of the things you can do is check out that TEDx talk. It will give you an exercise so you can figure out, number one, who you are.
Yeah.
If you're a looker, a listener, or a toucher. And second, then you can start paying attention to the people around you. Because we all have a tendency to treat everybody as though they're the same as we are, and that can be a mistake. It's true, lookers, 75% of the people in the world are lookers. So if you're a looker, you're in pretty good stead. But every time those listeners aren't paying attention to you, looking at you, you're getting frustrated. That doesn't mean they aren't paying attention to you, though. And we have in our brains, one final thought, something called mirror neurons. Mirror as a mirror on the wall. And this is a subconscious part of our brain that it is encouraging us to give the same body language that we are seeing from other people. So guess what? Your subconscious mind is helping you do a better job of connecting with people by mirroring their body language. And it's funny because I ask people, all right, you've hung around with me for a while. What do you think I am? Looker, listener, or toucher? And most people will say, looker. I'm actually a listener. But if I spent this entire interview looking down to the left and pointing my ear at the camera, a lot of people would feel alienated. I can't change how my brain works, but I can adjust my body language to be with the people where I am.
So taking all that into account, I mean, I think the key thing there is you have to be aware of who you are, and then you have to get over yourself and be able to then mirror that person. And I get that on the body language, but actually talk to me about something else that I think is really interesting that we don't talk about enough, and that is energy, right? Kind of like your cadence and your voice and et cetera, because, our members they have to address some very difficult conversations and topics. But having said that, being able to do it in the right way, I think is also quite a skill. So what about the energy piece there that's actually, of kind of going back and forth between humans when you are connecting?
Mm-hmm. And frankly, research, once again, neuroscience nerd, research shows that if you listen well, people will rate you as the most fascinating person in the room. So part of it becomes being a good listener. And there are two types of listening you can do. The first is the most common, and it's called listening to respond, where you listen for the data that the person is sharing. And then you're thinking about how you're going to respond to that data, what you're going to say when they finish speaking. Useful. But an even better level, particularly for us as people who are in insurance and financial advisors, there's something called listening for understanding and empathy, where we're not just listening for content, we're actually paying attention to a person's body language. Does it look like they're pulling back? Or does it look like, they're twitchy and they're nervous about what it is that we're talking about? And what we do then is we name what it is that we see. And we say things like, when I talk with other people about this subject, I have to admit, a lot of times they get kind of nervous about it. How are you feeling about this? And we ask them to name their feelings. Or if they can't name their feelings, because I've got all kinds of German relatives who cannot name their feelings for you. Often what I do for them is I name the feeling for them. It's like, are you feeling nervous? Are you feeling anxious? Or if I were in your situation, I would feel, and then let them respond. that's part of showing understanding and empathy. Because if you're building a relationship, it's not just your job to push out information that they need to know. It's also showing them that they are seen and heard, because most of us wander around feeling chronically unseen and unheard. And when somebody pays attention to us, it feels so wonderful, and we feel so important to that person in that moment. And we're willing to share information. So it's not just energy. Well, of course, it's energy in that, yes, a lot of times you're leading in a little bit to, once again, decrease the distance between you and the other person to show that you're engaged and you're hanging on their words. But it's also the passion that you have for what you do. And that's usually where we put the energy. So once the best thing we can do is ask them the insightful questions, which all of you know how to do. You know how to gather information. And then talk about the feelings that people have about sharing this information, and also name what's going on with them. It's people who have been in this situation, oftentimes these things occur for them. And it's showing them that we're interested, and then finally being able to paraphrase what they're saying. And so if somebody says, I'm feeling really anxious about things. And so you say to them, I get it. You're feeling anxious about this. And people say to me, I'm going to say that. All I did was just say the same thing they said. They're going to think I'm an idiot. And actually, no. What shows up in the brain stuff is that when you use the words that someone has just used to tell you something, they literally feel seen and heard, and they feel more connected with you. Because if someone were to say to me, I feel anxious, and I say, oh, so you're feeling nervous about this? Nervous is not anxious. It's a different thing. And a lot of times we can be judgmental when we change somebody else's language. So for us, paraphrasing really becomes play back the words that they're giving you. It makes them feel seen and heard, and that increases their energy and their connection with you. Because when the best thing you can do energy-wise is to be passionate about what you do. And that is to solve people's problems and help them feel safe, no matter what comes down the pipe. And when you're paying attention to what they're saying and paraphrasing it, they feel connected with you. And that gets a relationship off to a good start, and it keeps a good relationship going.
So I think you said something that I really want to touch on, which is people walk around feeling chronically unseen, unheard. That is so powerful for a financial advisor. I think when you pair with the fact that there's so many Americans out there who have not had the financial education and are walking around, a lot of times, most of the clients are not coming to your doorstep saying, hey, I'm, independently wealthy, and I just can't wait to talk to you about what I want to do with my money, right? So there's a whole level of, oftentimes we're finding, right, with shame and fear in going into this. So knowing that also they're walking around and they're searching for a place to be safe, I think is what you're saying, to be heard and seen. Actually, what a positive position that puts you in as an advisor, if you know that, if you're coming from that standpoint, is what I think you're saying, right? And so then how you can take that. So what would you say to an advisor when they have that? They're in the beginning of creating this relationship. They're dealing with something. They have to be able to get to these pieces. So I like that you're saying, repeat, basically reiterate what they're saying using that same language. It's another key point there. But what can advisors do to bring down that stress level? What are some kind of tips there that they can do to kind of break through that so they can get the people into a positive, forward-thinking mode and not get shut down by that fear?
And I think and that's a great question, because I think part of it becomes being all things a method actor, putting yourself in the other person's situation. And you named the feeling, Suzanne, because people are afraid. People are afraid they have made financial mistakes, and you will find them out and think they're idiots. That's one of their biggest fears. The second, they're afraid they've missed opportunities. Mm-hmm. And they're afraid that they're in a hole that they can't get out of. So fear is the biggest thing you will encounter when you're working with someone new. And so being able to name those fears, and a lot of times telling a story. of somebody else who's been in a similar situation. And because magical things happen when we tell stories. The 10,000-foot view is that if I'm telling you a story about something that's happened to me or some client that I've worked with, my brain actually reacts as though that's happening to me in the moment. So if I'm talking about a client who's very fearful, it's almost as though my brain thinks I'm in that situation. That's interesting. But what's cool is that the client then at the same time also feels like they're in there. What's going on is that the fear center of the client is lighting up as though they are the client in the story. And that connects us on a molecular level. You can get me going on storytelling all day long. But the idea is people are afraid, number one, that they made a mistake and they've done bad things, so you'll find out. Number two, they're afraid that you're going to try to sell them something they don't need or want. Two biggest fears. How do we address this stuff? Well, we can say, I'm not going to try to sell you anything. They're not going to believe you. But if you can tell them a story about the first time you met a client who was in a similar situation, and guess what? We had this conversation, and here was the solution that we ended up coming up with, and here's how we solved that issue, and here's how their life was made better by what we're doing together. So positioning yourself as a person who solves a problem that they have. And if they don't have this problem and they've already solved it elsewhere, that's just great. That you were there to figure out whether or not the two of you really ought to work together. And so if you're having an exploratory conversation with somebody, to be able to say up front, hey, this is a sales-free zone. I'm not going to sell you anything today. I'm here just to listen, to ask you some good questions and to better understand what it is that you need. So I'm going to listen more than I'm going to talk. Want to have a good understanding. And then by the end of the conversation, we'll figure out whether or not there's something for us to have our next conversation about. And then I can come back to you with some things that I think you ought to consider. But today, I'm just here to listen. We, as people who want to build relationships, want to dive right in and know we can help people and want to get them the solutions right away. Most people aren't ready for it immediately. We need to build trust with them, and we build trust by listening, asking good questions, and letting them know their big fear about being judged and being sold to. That's not going to happen today. It makes sense.
So it makes perfect sense. Yeah. And then I guess the other piece I'd say is with the storytelling, with all of that, where would you fit in and neurologically with all the stuff we're talking about? Where does visualization fit in, right? Where does visualization? Because I do think we have a lot of people that they want to work with goal setting also with their clients. And so what happens with the brain when you're starting to do visualization or, because it's the same thing. There's the imagine this could happen to you in a very negative, but there's of course the other positive of let's be aspirational about it and what that looks like. So thoughts there.
And you've hit the nail on the head because one of the most powerful words you can use in any conversation is imagine. Because you put people in a place. So if it's a negative place, because they're already in fear, if you do, and a lot of times it becomes, if you do nothing today, what will this look like for you in a year, in 2 years? And then have them tell you. Or if you don't have the worry that when you retire, you're going to run out of money, imagine how that would look. And talk to me about that. Because once again, we have seen this for a lot of other people. We know what's coming. And we have a tendency to tell people what's coming instead of inviting them to do the visualization and then tell us what they see. And it's much more powerful. Because when I take a look at, if I do nothing today, in 5 years, my financial situation will be dire, particularly if I know that these things are coming along. Or if I do something today and I'm protected from that, hey, this is how my life is going to look. So we, as people who want to build connections with folks and want to get them, frankly, they'll sell themselves on this if they're the ones who come up with a solution, because we've all been there. We've had people tell us, do this, and then a lot of times we resist, and so will our clients. But if we say, imagine this, imagine how your life will look if you do this, and tell me about that. Then what ends up happening is that they get so involved in this world that they're visualizing and that they create that's safe and is reaching their goals. You don't have to tell them what to do. That's what they'll want.
And I would think ostensibly too, that would be the basis for a much longer term relationship, because they want to keep coming back to the good stuff, right? So if you have somebody who's also on your side and that's celebrating you, I would think that would be a big positive. So thoughts there on that long-term relationship, right? Of keeping relationships over, I mean, we're talking, for a life insurance agent, I mean, hopefully you're establishing this for multi-generations. And I think that's a different piece now. People, it's not even just the retirement, it's the outliving them. It's the problem now is living too long, right? And getting into all sorts of stuff. So then you have to have connections with the children. So what would you say for kind of tips or tricks there with being able to develop that long-term rapport, to have a long-term relationship of these constant conversations?
And it's funny because it actually starts at the beginning, because you set the expectations there. And the best story I've heard from a financial planner was he was speaking with a husband and a wife about their situation. And, they were going to schedule another meeting, and they said, oh, it's going to have to be next month because we're going to the Bahamas in 2 weeks. So what does this, let's call him Rob. What does Rob do? Rob goes online and investigates the best travel books for the Bahamas, buys a copy, sends it to the couple, and says, have a wonderful trip. Well, it turns out that they were going with a bunch of their friends. This book arrives before they leave, and they feel seen and heard, right? Rob heard that they were going on this vacation, and he sent them something so that they can have a better vacation. So they're talking Rob up to their friends while they're on this vacation. So not only does Rob get to work with them, he gets to work with some of the other people who were there on that vacation who were impressed that he went out of his way to do something. So part of building and maintaining a relationship is the reach out with something of value on a regular basis. And you evaluate how often clients want to be in touch with you. So it could be once a quarter, you send somebody an article or a little video that you shot about something that is coming up for them. So it gives you the opportunity to speak to them directly through video, but at a time that's convenient for them. Or if they like to receive information by text, because this is one of the things you'll figure out early on in the relationship. How do people like to get information? How do they want to hear from you? We have a tendency to default to phone calls or emails. If they want text, let's use that. And why guess when people will be happy to tell you how it is that they like to get information? So the idea is relationships take time and thought, meaning that 1 year comes up, and how many of us have sent out the note of, hey, it's been a year since we've spoken, it's time to talk again. And if you are sending people something once a quarter, they've already heard from you a couple of times when you're not asking them to do anything. You're sending them something you think is of value. That's the best way to maintain a relationship. And if you know that you also want to be in touch with their children at some point, ask if it's okay to every once in a while reach out to their kids and share information you think might be of use to them as well. So follow up, even when somebody is a client, is really the best way to maintain that relationship and build it.
But I like what you're saying, because you're saying just flat out ask them. Just flat out ask them up front how they prefer, what they prefer, who they can get that permission from them. I like that, because I do find that sometimes it becomes a little too cookie cutter and too routine, and then it can kind of come off as not very authentic, right? Or if you're somebody who like that, it just comes, you don't want to come off as cheesy, and it can come off as cheesy, right? Mm-hmm. So you're trying to, because I think what you're saying is you're trying to make that one-to-one with the client that fits what the client wants and how the client wants to be communicated to. So if you're like just an effusive person and you just love to push all this out, maybe that's too much for your client. But also maybe just naturally you'll find the people that you fit with too, right? I do think there is some piece to that of just finding your right size fit people. And I guess I'd ask the other question, which is, I think one of the hardest things we hear is, we know it's a numbers game, but having said that, every member wants to keep every client, right? You don't want to lose any. But let's talk about, when people do need to leave and break those relationships, or it's just not the right relationship, right? And what does that look like? So any thoughts there for knowing that, especially when you're getting going, to say, it's just not going to be a great fit, maybe we're swimming upstream.
It's funny because that reminds me of a story. I was talking with a physician who was no longer a practicing doctor. He was now a consultant to other doctors on how to build their practices. And we were having a phone conversation, and about 10 minutes into it, I said, I'm really not the right person for you. Let me refer you to somebody else I think is a better fit. And he said, what do you mean? And I said, well, usually when I spent this much time with somebody, I realize I know whether or not I'm a good fit. And whatever it is that makes that happen, I'm not feeling it here. So I would be doing you a disservice if we worked together. So let me, send you to somebody else that I think will be better for you. And honest to goodness, for the next 15 minutes, this doctor is trying to convince me that we really need to work.
I was going to say, he's like, what are you talking about? I'm an overachiever. Why don't you?
And so part of it was, I ultimately ended up saying to him, no, this is not a scarcity ploy. This is not me saying, pulling back so that you want me more. This is, I have, made decisions like this before when I felt things really weren't right. And then they ended up badly for the other person or for me or for both of us. And I want to save both of us that angst. This is a better fit for you. I promise. And so part of that becomes is you as in insurance and in financial advisories, where you fit well. And it's easy for you. You wouldn't be in this business if you didn't know these things and had that gut reaction of this is a good fit or this is not a good fit. Call things what they are. And you're there as an advocate. And sometimes the advocacy that you have is, we would be a great team to work together to reach the goals that you shared. Let's do this. And sometimes the advocacy is, we've gone as far as I can take you. And now I see you have a need in this area, and that's not my strong suit. So what I want is your permission to connect you with somebody I think is a better fit in this area. Because when we started to work together, I promised you I would always have your best interests at heart. And in this instance, I'm not your best interest. This other person is. So if I have your permission, I'd like to make that referral. And people will think you're wonderful because you are. You're putting their interests ahead of yours. And that doesn't happen every day.
That's true. And what a great, those are just that's just great language you just used to be able to open up, because in our space, we want our members, one of the best parts of NAIFA is you can build out your entire kind of practice team, if you will, for people that have specialties and be able to do that cross referral and hand them into these specific pieces. And what a great way to be able to do that. And then actually your trust factor, monumentally increases because you're not trying to be the one-stop general practitioner of all. You're trying to actually get them to the specialists that they need. And probably a good method too with the multi-generational piece. It could be like, your father trusted me, but I think for you, that might be a great way to do some split cases, et cetera, to help them identify what's going to be the good fit, because that can get a little dicey as well. So yes, those are great pieces. Okay. So now let's talk about, I want to switch gears a little bit, and I want to talk about what we like to focus in on all the time, which is just getting better every day. Like, Chris Gandy will tell you if he's here, 1% more, 1% better each and every day, right? Is going to get us to be the top of our game. So what are kind of some 3 things that advisors right now, just listening to this, can just up their game today by some tips you want to give them?
Okay. And I've got 2. And the first is...
I'll take 2.
Yeah. Every week, try something new. So decide, because here's the thing. There are so many things you can do. And Chris talked about, the 1%. From a brain standpoint, pick one thing. And my overachievers know you can't have 2 or 3. One thing. Okay, so this week, I'm going to try paraphrasing. And when I'm talking with a client, when I'm talking with people at home, to try paraphrasing and see what kind of responses I get, and number one, make sure that I'm using the same language that that person is using. And then once you decide that one thing that you're going to do this week, second thing, get yourself an accountability partner. Tell somebody, this is what I'm practicing this week. Then what I would love to have you do is hold me accountable next week. Let's have a 5-minute conversation. And I'll tell you what I learned by doing that stuff this week. Because we make promises to ourselves all the time and we are full of crap. Inertia is the most powerful force in the universe. We automatically go back to doing the same things that we've always done because that feels comfortable for us. And so when I say to you, I'm going to practice paraphrasing this week, and I want to talk to you next Tuesday and let you know for 5 minutes and let you know what I discovered and what I've learned. It may be Sunday night when I realize, geez, I haven't really done much paraphrasing. Then Monday, I'm going to focus on it. Knowing that somebody else is going to have you accountable, that you have to report back, exponentially increases the chances that you will do something and you will learn something and you'll make your practice better.
So, I hadn't thought about that, but that is actually a hidden benefit of NAIFA membership, because I feel very confident that if you're a member, you could pick up the phone in our huge network and say, I need an accountability partner. And somebody would say, okay, I'm here for you. Right. And that works really, really well. I want to ask you a little bit about your team training, because we do have so many members and then potential members out there who are either head of their agency or, running their firm or building a firm and working on the team dynamics. So when you come in to coach, talk to us about what are you normally looking to do? Like, what are the top, I guess, let me ask this. What are the top challenges that you get asked to come in to help with in that team environment when you're working with a firm or agency?
Mm-hmm. And it's usually, and it won't surprise you, it's a communication issue.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, because people are in the middle of it, they cannot see it. So I'll tell you a quick story about how I was brought in by the head of loan syndication in a bank. And he said to me, I want you to do a training for my people on how they need to follow processes and procedures. And I thought, I want to show up for that. Don't make me come. And I said, okay, so how about I interview your people and find out what they really need? So I did 10-minute phone interviews with all of the people in the department. And I discovered, no, they follow processes and procedures, and they're detail and deadline driven, but they deal with people who are relationship managers in the bank. So the people have the relationships with the companies that need to be in the loan syndication, or that will purchase it once it's done. And because these people are relationship managers, and actually because the people in loan syndication were deadline and detail driven, they would say to the people, the relationship managers, if we don't get this information by Friday, the deal won't close. Well, relationship managers aren't driven by details or deadlines.
Right.
And so if they've already talked to the client that day, they're not going to call them again because they don't want to look like a fool. And so part of what then it became is you need to deal with people in the relationship. They're relationship managers. Deal with them like you have a relationship with them. Because the other thing they were doing is when they couldn't get the information from them, they were finding a way to backdoor it, which means that they were training the relationship managers never to get back to them and give them information because they'd find it someplace else. And why should the relationship manager be bothered? So we needed to break that cycle. And one of the strategies that we came up with was at the end of every loan syndication, go back to the relationship manager and say, I'm sure there are things we could have said or done, I could have said or done that would have made this a better process for you and your client. And I would really love to hear that stuff. Please tell me. And of course, they would get information, and they were data driven, so they liked that. And then the relationship manager is waiting for them to say, okay, so here's what you should have done for me. Don't go there. Say, thank you. I really appreciate your being honest with me. And the next time we do a deal together, I'll keep this stuff in mind. And when the next deal came along, talk with the relationship manager again and say, hey, these were the 3 things you told me that would make things better for you and your client. So here's what I'm going to do about that stuff. And by the way, part of my job is to make you look like a rock star in front of your client. So if things come up during the course of this deal where I can make that happen, just let me know and I'll do my best. And suddenly their emails and their phone calls were getting returned, and they were getting the information that they needed. Because instead of dealing from their own deadline and detail-oriented perspective, and we're dealing from a relationship perspective. So a lot of what I do with teams is we figure out what is it that you're trying to accomplish and what's the best way to do it. And usually it comes from better understanding the people they're trying to reach and then changing the way they communicate. So it's how that person likes to get information, and then they get what they need.
So, I mean, you're talking about the classic, front office, back office kind of a piece that's prevalent in every financial services organization. I'd say every organization, every business, right? Where you've got just the different propensities for how people deal with the information. But I think what's interesting, and I think it bears all of us in mind, is that there's our way that we personally do this, and then there's what we need to do for the business, for the good of the overall order. And these two, you have to step outside of yourself to do that, right? So if I'm a looker and then I'm dealing with listeners, or if I'm the listener and I'm dealing, I need to take that opposite approach. I like that you brought up the method actor. I think that's brilliant. Being able to take time to get in that other person's shoes, as uncomfortable as that might be, right? But knowing that we need to do that. Any kind of examples there or practice tips for how we can kind of apply that? I think it's probably especially hard for the looker since they dominate the market. So tips for lookers to become better with the listeners and the other 5% there.
So I'll tell you another story there. I talked about lookers, listeners, and touchers, and I had a president of a digital marketing firm come up to me afterwards and say, now I get it. I've been interviewing for a job, and this fellow was sitting across from me, didn't give me any eye contact throughout the entire interview. And I thought he was just blowing me off. But every time I asked him a question, he knew the answer and gave it to me. He said, and now I get this person is a listener. Doesn't give me lots of eye contact. And I said, great insight. Now, what's the job you're hiring this person for? And he's like, as an account rep. I said, no, that most of your clients are going to be lookers and then touchers. So that's 80% of people value eye contact. And if this person doesn't automatically give people eye contact, the relationships there will not flourish. So do you believe that this person can be trained? Obviously, the person has the knowledge. Do you believe the person can be trained to give people more eye contact and build relationships that way? And if that's so, then this could be a great person for you to hire. And if not, wrong person. So know your capabilities, know the capabilities of the people around you, and put the right people in the right slot.
Yeah, what a great tip, because maybe juice is not worth the squeeze in that standpoint. Just go for the people that I love. That's a great one, especially in the higher recruiting side of it, which is such a big part of our industry, is being able to bring more people in.
Being
the right people in, of course, yeah. And what you've given me thought too is that I do think that as we need more people to come into financial services, right? And I think actually coming from this viewpoint that you're saying is like, one, do you like people, right? Two, the passion you talked about. There's some different ways we can, I think, accomplish that. But I think that's I love that you have to, you're thinking about from the hiring viewpoint, getting that right person into the slot with the group of people, with the population that you're trying to target. That makes a ton of sense. Okay, well, Lynne, we're coming up on what we like to call our lightning round. But before we do that, do you want to have anything you want to say about what your people will experience when we get to Apex East in just under 2 weeks or so? A little over 2 weeks, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things we're doing in advance is we're doing a survey. So we're asking a couple of questions, which will then allow me to tailor this session toward a particular problem that everybody who's coming to this session experiences. So here's the beauty of it. We can talk it in generalities, and I hope you picked up a tip here and there. We are going to laser focus on a particular situation that everybody who comes to this faces. And how can we use communication to break through that stuff? Understanding how people's brains work, understanding what to say or do to make that connection with people so that ultimately we're not telling people what to do, we're getting them to do what they should do.
Oh, excellent. Yes, a little persuasion there. Okay, well, so if you haven't gotten your seat yet, you can do so by going to apex.naifa.org. There's We're actually down, Lynn. I don't know if anybody's giving the numbers. We're kind of running out of slots. So get your space there. Again, it is October 24th, 1-day event at our new national headquarters in Roslyn, which is Arlington, Virginia. So we're excited to see you and be there in person. And then looking into 2024 as well about how Lynne Franklin's going to pair up with NAIFA and do more good work. So with that, Lynn, we want to get to the lightning round. This is there's no wrong answers. It's just questions that get to know you a little bit more and get some extra value out of you. So first, easy one, favorite food.
Favorite food. I live in Chicago. It's got to be pizza.
Oh, then Chris Gandy's going to say, what, is it deep dish? Like, what's your favorite one? Where in the city is your favorite?
Okay, so deep dish, Lou Malnati's. Lou Malnati's or Nancy's.
Or Nancy's. Oh, that's a good one too. I forgot about Nancy's. All right, next question. Then favorite sports team.
Favorite sports team. Okay, well, I grew up in Minnesota. And so, for the longest time, it was the Vikings. But yes, I moved to Chicago long enough ago. It's the Bulls.
It's got to be the Bulls. So we're going to have to connect you with Corey Anderson. So big shout out there to Corey Anderson, who's a major Vikings fan. We'll be happy that you said that first. All right. Next one. What do you listen to for a podcast? Or what do you listen to regularly?
And I have to admit, I am an audiobook person because traffic in Chicago is not a fun place to be. So in order to prevent myself from getting honked off from all the people who are doing stupid things in front of me, I put audiobooks on. And so I listen to that stuff, brings my blood pressure down, gets me to focus on other things auditorily because I'm a listener. I can get audiobooks, but I can still see what's going on around me. And then I can smile rather than get angry with people.
So is there a top one you've listened to lately? What kind of, do you listen to like more informative stuff? Or are you listening to novels? What do you listen to?
Well, and I listen to novels because there was one point where I was listening to the audiobook for something called Sapiens, which is the history of us as Homo sapiens. And I realized it was giving me lots of data and I was missing it because I needed to pay attention to who was turning left in front of me. And so when I call them popcorn for the mind books. So things that, where there's character development and, mysteries a lot of times or historical stuff and things that, engage my brain so that I'm not focused on the fact that I'm sitting in traffic and it's going nowhere. Without, I need things that do not frustrate me or make me anxious when I can get both of those in traffic anyway.
True. Good point. All right. And then, if you could go back in time and have dinner with anybody who's either living or was living at some point, who would that be?
Here, Roosevelt.
Yeah.
Because here was a woman who was brought up in a very sheltered environment and then suddenly found herself on the world stage and then found herself without her husband and continued to make a difference in the lives of people and around the world. And so that kind of global perspective that one person can make a difference and influence lots of other people in a positive way, love to pick her brain.
So my actual favorite quote, and it's so funny you said, is Eleanor Roosevelt, who said, most people tiptoe softly through life to arrive safely at death. That's so true. So, maybe live a little bit more out loud, I think is what she was trying to say. And she certainly did that. What about you? Favorite quote?
See, now I'm in Chicago. So actually, I've got two. First one is Chicago, Al Capone. You can get a lot farther with a kind word and a gun than you can with a kind word alone. And because I'm actually related to Ben Franklin, one of my favorite Ben Franklinism is an empty bag cannot stand upright.
All very true. Well, thank you so much, Lynn, for joining us. We can't wait to see you October 24th at Apex, and we're glad that you're now part of the NAIFA family. So thanks to everybody. We look forward to seeing you on our next Advisor Today podcast. Take care.
Thanks for joining us for NAIFA's Advisor Today podcast series. Make sure to subscribe to get future episodes. And if you're interested in coming on the show, let us know.